The 1970s were the decade when technology first walked into the living room. These are 8 products that were once part of everyday life, carried by companies that genuinely believed they had the future in their hands. Most of them did. The world just moved on anyway. Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari, was asked years later about the Atari Video Music. His answer was direct. He said it was financially a major disaster. He said they planned a first production run of 2,000 units. He said he thought they sold 10 at full price. This is the story of those 10 sales. In 1977, Atari was the hottest company in entertainment. Pong had made them famous. The Atari 2600 was weeks away from launch, and somewhere inside the building, an engineer named Robert Brown had spent the previous year building something nobody had asked for. Internally, the project was called Project Mood. The product that emerged from it was the Video Music, Model C240. A small metal and wood box, roughly the size of a stereo component, that you connected to your hi-fi system on one side and your television on the other. You played music. The box read the audio signal and converted it into animated shapes and colors that pulsed and shifted on your screen in time with the sound. Left channel, right channel, each producing its own color and shape, merging and separating as the music moved. It was the world's first commercial electronic music visualizer. Every music player you have used in the last 20 years, every screensaver that ever danced to your library, every light show in every media app traces its lineage directly to this box. Atari launched the Video Music at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago in 1977, where it was demonstrated at a local disco. One writer who covered it later noted that the device arrived at the absolute peak of the culture of getting a group of people together, playing Pink Floyd, and watching the lights. It failed to reach a single one of those people at full price. The original price was $169.95. By Christmas of that same year, it had dropped to $59.95. By April 1978, an electronics store in Pennsylvania was giving it away free with the purchase of a Pioneer stereo system. Production ended after 1 year. The machine that invented the music visualizer was beaten on its launch day by the machine Atari built in the same building. The Atari 2600 sold 30 million units. The Video Music was given away with stereos. Sometimes the future and the present arrive in the same company at the same moment, and only one of them wins. But this wasn't even the strangest failure of the decade.
Now, people who want television to do their thing entertain themselves with Odyssey.
Ralph Baer had an idea about playing games on television in 1966. On August 31st of that year, he was sitting outside the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City, waiting for a colleague, when the idea came to him clearly enough to write down. He wrote the actual 4-page proposal the very next morning at his office in Nashua, New Hampshire. He worked at a defense contractor called Sanders Associates, and for the next 3 years he developed and refined the idea through 7 generations of prototypes. He called the final version the Brown Box. By 1972, Magnavox had licensed his technology and put it on sale in their stores. The Magnavox Odyssey, the first commercial home video game console in history. September 1972, priced at $99.95. The console displayed 3 white squares on a screen, 2 paddles, 1 ball, no sound, no color, no score display. Players tracked their own scores by hand. To make the games look like more than white squares on a black screen, the box came with translucent plastic overlays that you taped directly onto your television set. Printed with fields, mazes, and haunted house backgrounds, the hardware could not generate itself. The box also came with dice, poker chips, play money, and game cards, because the games required physical accessories to function. It also included an optional light gun accessory, sold separately, one of the earliest ever produced for a home gaming system. It was a video game console that came with board game pieces and a toy gun, and it was the first one, ever. Magnavox sold approximately 350,000 units between 1972 and 1975. The Smithsonian Institution considers it not a commercial success, though it was significant enough to break even financially. The more significant damage came from distribution. Magnavox only sold the Odyssey through their own dealership network. Salespeople in those stores told customers the machine only worked with Magnavox televisions. It worked with any television. Millions of people who owned other brands never knew the console was available. A better idea sat unsold because the person behind the counter didn't understand what they were selling. Nolan Bushnell attended an Odyssey demonstration in 1972 before creating Pong at Atari. Magnavox and Sanders Associates sued Atari for patent infringement. Atari settled out of court, paying $1,500,000 and taking a license rather than fighting the claim in front of a judge. Later, Nintendo sued Magnavox, attempting to have the patents invalidated. The court sided with Magnavox and the patents held up. The patents Ralph Baer filed for a machine that came with poker chips and plastic screen overlays earned over $100 million in licensing fees across decades of litigation. The machine itself was discontinued in 1975. The idea it contained became the entire video game industry. The next product had nothing to do with games, and everything to do with looking impressive in your own living room.
Is General Electric Performance Television, a revolutionary new set from the same people who brought you the first home television receiver.
In 1978, if you wanted to tell your neighbors something without saying a word, you bought a television. Not any television. The General Electric Widescreen 1000. It arrived in 1978 and cost $2,800. That is the equivalent of roughly $13,700 today. For that price, you received a 45-inch screen, a hardwood veneer cabinet the size of a sideboard, 2 built-in speakers, and a pedestal compartment designed to house an optional GVCR. That VCR, manufactured by Hitachi and rebadged under the GE name, cost an additional $1,000. The machine weighed 359 pounds. Here is what made the GE Widescreen 1000 genuinely unusual. Despite the name, there was nothing widescreen about it. The picture was standard aspect ratio, the same as every other television in 1978. GE had taken a small CRT screen and used a system of lenses and mirrors inside a sealed projection chamber to magnify and reflect the image outward, then housed the whole apparatus inside a cabinet so large it was essentially a piece of furniture. What the marketing did not mention was that projection pictures in 1978 were dim, requiring a darkened room to look their best. What looked impressive in a showroom with the lights down looked considerably less impressive on a Sunday afternoon with the curtains open. Stereo television broadcasts did not exist yet either, so the 2 built-in speakers spread across a cabinet over 5 feet wide were playing mono sound. One writer who covered the era noted that more of these units ended up in hotel lobbies than in private homes. By the mid-1980s, projection television technology had improved considerably, and the Widescreen 1000 had become a footnote. The flat-panel television that would replace the CRT entirely was still 20 years away. The GE Widescreen 1000 sits between those two worlds, a genuinely enormous box of ambition that arrived in the gap between the television that existed and the television that was coming. The next entry didn't try to impress anyone, and it outlasted almost everything else on this list because of that. In May 1970, at the National Computer Conference, a company called Centronics Data Computer Corporation introduced a printer, the Centronics 101, a machine that used a print head with 7 metal pins arranged in a matrix, each pin firing against an inked ribbon and striking the paper with enough force to print through 4 copies of a multi-part carbon form simultaneously. The Centronics 101 was the first commercially successful dot matrix impact printer. It could print 165 characters per second. It weighed, in its shipping crate, around 200 pounds. It had no lowercase letters. Its character set was 62 symbols, 10 numeric, 26 uppercase, and 26 special characters. Centronics itself had been a division of Wang Laboratories before being spun off as an independent company in 1971, incorporated in Hudson, New Hampshire. It was also, almost by accident, the machine that defined how computers and printers would talk to each other for the next 30 years. The parallel electrical interface that Centronics developed to connect the 101 to computers became the industry standard for printer connections. Centronics gave it away. They made no attempt to charge licensing fees or protect it as a proprietary standard. When IBM incorporated a variant of it into the IBM PC in 1981, it became universal and unchallengeable. Every printer cable connected to every personal computer until USB arrived in the late 1990s used a version of the connector that Centronics designed for a machine that could not print a lowercase letter. The connector became so associated with Centronics that it is formally known in engineering literature as the Centronics connector to this day. By the mid-1970s, Centronics had expanded internationally and employed over 6,000 people globally. Dot matrix printers became the standard for personal computer output through the 1970s and 1980s. The scream of a dot matrix printer running a print job was the sound of productivity in every office, every school computer room, and every home with a PC from roughly 1975 to 1992. Then, inkjet printers arrived. Quieter, sharper, capable of printing photographs. The dot matrix did not disappear immediately. Banks and shops used impact printers for carbon copy receipts well into the 2000s because the impact mechanism was the only way to print through multiple paper layers simultaneously. But from living rooms and offices, the distinctive mechanical shriek faded. The Centronics parallel port it pioneered was formally retired as an interface standard in the late 1990s. The machine that defined the connector outlasted the connector itself. The next one didn't just outlast its era. It quietly wrote itself into millions of living rooms without anyone noticing.
The information channel, exclusively on ITV and Channel 4.
On September 23, 1974, the BBC launched a service called Ceefax. The name was a phonetic rendering of the phrase Ceefax, and for the next 38 years, that is exactly what it did. The project had begun not as a news service, but as an accessibility tool. BBC engineers in the early 1970s were looking for ways to provide subtitles for deaf viewers. The solution they arrived at used the invisible, unused lines between each frame of a broadcast television signal to carry text data. Those lines were already there in every transmission. Nobody was using them. The engineers began hiding information inside them. Ceefax became the world's first broadcast teletext system, and page 888 became the world's first closed captioning service, allowing deaf viewers to read dialogue on screen for the first time. Ceefax was Teletext, a system that transmitted pages of text and simple graphics that appeared on your television when you pressed a button on your remote. You pressed a 3-digit number. Page 101, Headlines. Page 301, Sport. Page 401, Weather. Page 888, Subtitles. The page you requested cycled around on a continuous loop broadcast alongside the television signal, and you waited, usually for somewhere between 5 and 30 seconds, until the transmission came around again and your page appeared. The BBC started with 30 pages in 1974. Ceefax eventually grew to hundreds of pages covering news, sport, finance, weather, television listings, travel information, recipes, and the lottery results. By the 1980s, most television sets sold in the UK came with a built-in teletext decoder as standard. Ceefax became infrastructure, not a feature. Infrastructure. The thing millions of people used without thinking about it. The way they used light switches or tap water. From 1983 onward, the BBC broadcast Ceefax pages on screen as a fill-in program during gaps in the schedule. From 1986, BBC Two showed nothing but Ceefax pages for most of the daylight hours before evening programming began. A television channel broadcasting text on a colored background with a synthesizer music loop playing underneath it. For hours. Every weekday, the internet arrived. Pages that updated in real time without needing to cycle around a loop. News that did not fit in 40 characters per line. The Ceefax audience shrank through the 2000s as broadband reached more homes. On October 23, 2012, at 23:32 and 19 seconds, the BBC switched off the analog television signal in Northern Ireland, the last region to complete the digital switchover. Ceefax ended with it, at that precise second, after 38 years of continuous broadcast. The service that had told Britain what was happening, what was on television, what the weather would be, and what the lottery numbers were, went dark in the middle of the night when nobody was watching. The next one looked like a win right up until it wasn't. Stereo sound used two speakers, two channels, left and right. By the early 1970s, the audio industry had decided that two channels were not enough. They had an idea. 4 channels, 4 speakers, one at each corner of the room. Sound coming from in front of you, behind you, and to both sides simultaneously. An immersive listening experience that would replicate the sensation of being inside the music. They called it Quadraphonic sound. They invested millions. They signed major artists. Aerosmith, The Who, Emmylou Harris, Pink Floyd. All of them released albums mixed specifically for 4-channel playback. Then they launched 4 separate, completely incompatible formats. SQ and QS arrived in 1971. UD4 followed in 1974. None of them could talk to each other. CBS had a system called SQ. Sansui had a system called QS. JVC had a system called CD4. Nippon Columbia had a system called UD4. Each required its own specific decoder. A record mixed in SQ sounded wrong when played through a CD4 decoder. A QS disc would not give you the full experience on an SQ receiver. And the CD4 format added an additional obstacle that the others did not. To decode its discrete 4-channel signal properly, you needed a specialized stylus on your turntable, not just the right decoder, a different needle. Buying the right format still was not enough. You also had to buy additional hardware before you heard what you had paid for. Consumers stood in electronics stores holding albums and had no way of knowing which system would play them correctly. The salespeople often did not know either. Buying into Quadraphonic meant committing to one format, buying the matching decoder, possibly buying a new stylus, and hoping the record labels you cared about had chosen the same side. None of the sides ever won. The format war lasted roughly 5 years. By 1976, the record labels had largely stopped releasing quadraphonic pressings. Manufacturers discontinued their quadraphonic receivers and decoders. The consumers who had invested in the technology had equipment that played a format the industry had abandoned. They also had 4 speakers in their living rooms, which is 2 more than most people wanted to find space for. Quadraphonic sound was right about the future. Surround sound in home cinema, the Dolby 5.1 systems that arrived in the 1990s, the object-based audio formats of today, all of them are direct descendants of the 4-channel idea that the 1970s audio industry destroyed by refusing to agree on a single standard. The technology was correct. The industry that built it could not get out of its own way. The next format made almost the same mistake in reverse, and it happened to the best picture home video had ever produced. On December 15, 1978, a store in Atlanta, Georgia, put the first title on sale for a new home video format. The film was Jaws. The format was called DiscoVision. The disc was 12 inches across, the same size as a vinyl record, and it stored a movie as an optical signal read by a laser beam. The picture quality it produced was sharper, cleaner, and more detailed than anything a VHS or Betamax tape could manage. It supported random access, meaning you could jump to any point in a film without rewinding. It supported freeze frame, slow motion, and chapter stops. It was the most technically advanced home video format ever offered to a consumer. In December 1978, 4 years before the compact disc applied the same laser reading technology to music, MCA and Philips had been developing the technology since the late 1960s. They introduced the video disc in 1972 as a concept, refined it through the mid-1970s, and brought it to market as DiscoVision in 1978. Philips manufactured the players. MCA manufactured the discs. The partnership encountered difficulties and eventually dissolved. Pioneer Electronics acquired a majority stake in 1980 and rebranded the format LaserDisc. Pioneer would keep it alive for over 2 decades. The problems were immediate and fundamental. The discs could not record. In a market where Betamax and VHS had already established that the primary use of home video was recording television programs, a format that only played back was asking consumers to pay more for a product that did significantly less. The discs were large and fragile, requiring careful handling. A standard film required 2 discs, and many films required the viewer to pause, flip, or switch partway through. There was also a problem that buyers discovered only after they had lived with the discs for a few years. Some early pressings suffered from a defect called laser rot. A manufacturing flaw allowed oxygen and moisture to penetrate the protective layer of the disc and oxidize the reflective aluminium underneath. The rot spread from the inside outward, invisibly, until the disc began producing dropouts and image errors during playback. Films that had been bought rather than rented, stored carefully, played only occasionally, were quietly destroying themselves on the shelf. Collectors discovered the problem gradually. Some of their discs were already unplayable. There was no fix. Most video rental stores chose not to stock LaserDisc because the VHS customer base was overwhelmingly larger. Without rental availability, consumers had little reason to invest in the hardware. Without hardware in homes, studios had little reason to press titles. The format existed in a permanent loop of insufficient scale. Pioneer discontinued LaserDisc players in 2009. The format that had the best picture quality of any home video medium of the 1970s and 1980s faded not because the picture was inadequate, but because the experience around the picture was. You could see Jaws more clearly on a LaserDisc than on any tape. You just could not record anything. And in 1978, that turned out to be the only thing people actually wanted to do. The final entry on this list invented an entire behavior, then lost the right to be remembered for it.
Betamax SL 5400 with the unique beta scan, remote control fast.
On May 10, 1975, Sony introduced the Betamax in Japan. In November of that year, it arrived in the United States, built into a combination unit with a 19-inch Trinitron television. The first home video recorder that a family could actually buy. You connected it to your television. You loaded a cassette. You pressed record. What was on television became something you owned, something you could watch again, something that did not disappear at the end of its broadcast. Sony called this time shifting, the ability to watch a program at a time other than when it was broadcast. It seems obvious now. In 1975, it was genuinely new. It was also, briefly, potentially illegal. Universal Studios and Walt Disney Productions sued Sony in 1976, arguing that home recording of their copyrighted programs violated copyright law. The case went to the Supreme Court of the United States. In January 1984, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in Sony's favor, establishing that recording a television program for personal later viewing was fair use. The machine that invented time shifting had to defend the concept of time shifting at the highest court in the country before anyone could be fully certain it was legal to use it. Customers expected magic. Instead, they got a courtroom. In 1975, Betamax had 100% of the home video recorder market. It was the only product in the category. By 1976, Sony had sold 100,000 units. The format was technically superior to what came next. Better picture resolution, less video noise, better audio quality. In 1976, JVC introduced VHS, Video Home System, where Sony had kept Betamax as a proprietary format that other manufacturers had to license. JVC made VHS an open standard that any company could freely build. Within a year, 5 Japanese manufacturers were producing VHS machines. RCA brought VHS to American consumers in 1977. The more manufacturers in the ecosystem, the lower the prices fell. The lower the prices fell, the more machines entered homes. The more machines in homes, the more video rental stores stocked VHS titles. The more VHS titles available, the more consumers chose VHS. Betamax tapes held 1 hour of footage at launch. VHS tapes held 2. An American football game runs longer than 1 hour. The American consumer made their decision partly on that single fact. By 1980, VHS held around 60% of the North American market. By 1981, Betamax had fallen to around 25%. By 1987, VHS commanded approximately 90% of the US market. In 1988, Sony admitted defeat and announced they would begin manufacturing VHS machines. By then, over 200 million VHS machines had been sold globally. Betamax accounted for a marginal fraction of that total. Being first and being better turned out to be worth nothing against being everywhere. Sony continued producing Betamax recorders until August 2002. Blank Betamax cassettes remained available until March 2016, when Sony discontinued them after 41 years of continuous production. The format that had arrived first, with the better picture, in the more refined machine, was the last to leave. Not because it had won, because Sony kept manufacturing it for the people who had never stopped using it, long after everyone else had moved on. The home video recorder that the Betamax made possible, the ability to record a program and watch it later, became so fundamental that it is now built into every television as a standard feature. Betamax invented something the world could not live without, and then lost the right to put its name on it. But the real ending here isn't about which format won. The Odyssey invented video games from poker chips and plastic screen overlays. Betamax won its case at the Supreme Court and still lost the market. Every product on this list got something right. The world just could not wait for them to get everything right.